It started with a bang, or more accurately, a series of bangs. A series of underwater bangs. A series of underwater bangs in the Baltic Sea. But what could have caused these bangs?
Sabotage at sea, that's what President Biden is calling the leaks and explosions
on the two Nord Stream pipelines.
Danish and German warships deployed to secure the area
as Europe faces a growing energy crisis.
As the story began to unravel, one question remained unanswered. Who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? There are three primary suspects in this case: Russia, Ukraine, and the United States of America. But before we get to their motives, let's talk about the nature of the crime. The Nord Stream pipeline runs over 700 miles between Russia and Germany. It cuts through the freezing depths of the Baltic Sea, passing straight through Sweden and Denmark's exclusive economic zones. Until the incident, it was a primary energy artery into Europe. And the pipes themselves were sturdy. Over an inch of raw steel encased in 4 inches of steel-reinforced concrete. When they blew, seismologists registered tremors scoring a 2.1 to 2.3 on the Richter scale. This wasn't just some scuba diving enthusiasts with an M80. This was heavy-duty military-grade sabotage. Those are the hard facts of the case, but we also need to take into account the surrounding circumstances. Russia and Ukraine are fighting a hot war. Tensions are high. NATO is backing Ukraine to the hilt, but at the same time, Western Europe, particularly Germany, is reliant on Russia for energy. Which brings us to our first suspect. First name Russia, full name the Russian Federation. The suspect has a rap sheet: an invasion of Georgia, human rights violations in Chechnya, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine initiated only months before the pipeline blew. They also have the means: a large military, a massive arsenal, equipment and specialists capable of pulling off this sort of operation. But where the case against Russia falls apart is the motive. Why would Russia blow up their own pipeline? If you follow the dollars, it just doesn't make sense. Nord Stream was an $18 billion investment that Moscow had majority ownership in. It was also a way for Russia to export their natural gas to desirable European markets. For a resource economy surrounded by frigid Arctic waters, that kind of access is invaluable. Nord Stream also provided Russia with a huge amount of leverage. Nord Stream 1 opened in 2011. In its 11 years of operation, Western Europe grew accustomed to a stable supply of Russian natural gas. That dependence is exactly why some were so quick to blame Moscow, framing the sabotage as an economic strike against Ukraine's allies in Western Europe. But that motive is filled with holes. If Russia wanted to inflict economic damage on Western Europe, they could achieve it by turning off a valve in Siberia. Why destroy an $18 billion piece of infrastructure and permanently remove a bargaining chip from the table? From where Moscow is sitting, that looks like a stupid play. But over in Washington, permanently removing that bargaining chip looks a lot more appealing. First name, the United States. Full name, the United States of America. The United States has a rap sheet of its own. Decades of foreign interventions, regime change, and military operations carried out far beyond its borders. Washington might act nice for the cameras, but when strategic interests are on the line, it can play dirtier than anyone else. And unlike Russia, it has a strong motive. Western Europe being reliant on an adversary for energy, that's unacceptable in the best of times. The United States had been openly against Nord Stream from the beginning. But in the lead up to the Ukraine war, its tone changed from condemnation to outright threats. In February 2022, just weeks before the war broke out, Joe Biden stood at a podium with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. During this address, Biden made a direct promise.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
When a reporter pressed him on how the US could bring an end to a project controlled by Russia and Germany, Biden looked straight into the camera and said,
"I promise you we'll be able to do it."
When the pipeline was sabotaged, the benefits to the United States were astronomical. American energy exports to Europe exploded as the continent desperately tried to fill the gaps in its supply chain. The United States increased its own leverage over Europe while simultaneously stripping away Russia's primary economic hold on the continent. At the same time, it prevented Europe from directly funding the enemies of their Ukrainian allies. A win-win-win from the American perspective. And it's not just motive. America also has the means. The most advanced military in the world and privileged access to European waterways make it more capable of pulling off this operation than anyone else. On top of that, respected investigative journalist Seymour Hersh cited an anonymous source claiming the US Navy and CIA were responsible for the incident. So case closed, right? Well, not quite. Like the waters of the Baltic Sea after the explosion, things were about to get very murky. Suspect 3. First name, Ukraine. Full name, also Ukraine. Like the US, Ukraine had a motive. Fighting an existential war against a superpower can make a country do desperate things. Things like biting the hand that feeds you. Defenders of Ukraine would ask, why would Kiev commit an act of industrial sabotage against the very countries funding their defense? At a glance, that logic holds up. But then you need to ask yourself, would Germany keep writing blank checks if Russia played their hand and threatened to stop supplying natural gas? And even if Russia never approached Germany with an ultimatum, it would still have the cash windfall from their natural gas exports. It would also create an immediate incentive for Western Europe to repair relations with Russia the second the war was over, potentially leading to worse terms for Ukraine in the case of a negotiated Russian withdrawal. But does Ukraine have the means? Not in the same way Russia or the United States does, but an investigation out of Germany makes it look more plausible than it would first appear. After the incident, investigators traced a civilian yacht's coordinates to those of the explosions. Its name, the Andromeda. It was rented using fake passports by a shadow crew of Ukrainian civilians and military personnel. Despite using fake passports, the crew used their real phone numbers and email addresses to communicate with each other. That was their first mistake. The organization that provided the yacht? A shell company with no employees, no phone number, and no physical address. Suspicious? Absolutely. But not quite a smoking gun. That changed when German federal police finally boarded the vessel. Below deck, forensics teams found what the crew left behind. Traces of military-grade explosives. In their rush to slip back into Ukraine, the saboteurs had left the crime scene unwashed. That was their second mistake. The case was cracked wide open, and German prosecutors felt confident enough to place a warrant on a Ukrainian military officer who is believed to have overseen the entire operation. The craziest part of the story is the Dutch military intelligence officials had warned Germany about a plot just months before the sabotage. Germany notified the CIA and warned Ukraine not to do it, but it happened anyway. And as far as I can tell, the German political establishment seems more than willing to sweep the incident under the rug. Same for Sweden and Denmark, despite the explosion causing a massive methane leak in their exclusive economic zones. I guess that just goes to show how much some nations are willing to sacrifice for their broader geopolitical interests. Even after committing one of the most profound acts of industrial sabotage in European history, Western Europe would still rather align with Ukraine than the greater evil they see in Russia. So, in conclusion, who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? My verdict? Probably Ukraine. But maybe the court disagrees. If so, let me know your objections in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, share it if you found it interesting, and as always, thanks for watching.